Hey everybody, we're just past the hour, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thanks for being here this afternoon. Um, just in case we haven't met, my name is Maddie Kohler, Program Director here at NASEO. Thanks for making the time to join us. Today we've got a call with SCEP office at DOE to go over the changes to the home energy rebates ALRD. Before we do that, just some quick logistics. We're going to keep everyone muted. Please use the chat to ask any questions so that we've got them documented and DOE can respond to them. But other than that, please reach out to me if anything else comes up. Hope to see you at future NASEO events and calls. But I think just with that, I'll hand it over to Edward so that he can start presenting. Edward, over to you.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Maddie. And thanks for making the time to join this discussion. And as a member of DOE Home Rebates Energy team, really want to appreciate your effort in continuing to work on your home energy rebates program for your state. Okay, then without, I'll just get right into it. We can just go over to the next slide. Okay, so to give a general overview of the second round of guidance modification of the program requirements and application instructions document. The first round of modification was done back in October last year. So this is the second round. And what this round of guidance modification does generally is on the topic of home assessment of 50121 and limited assessment of 50122, we simply really match the language in the data and tools requirements guide. The main change made back in May in that document, the data and tools guide, was deleting the reference to BPI 1100 for section 50121 and clarifications related to the home assessment requirement for section 50121. And because there already was a briefing devoted to that topic, I won't go over this item in this round in detail, but please be assured that there's nothing new in this guidance modification that isn't already in the data and tools requirements guide related to those topics. We also made the language and detail. We also matched the language and details provided in the technical resource document called the required elements of a consumer protection plan. And again, please be assured that there's nothing new in this guidance modification that isn't already in that document. We're really just aligning the language. On the topic of Energy Star certification requirement, the general requirement stays the same. You must use Energy Star certified equipment where applicable. One significant change we made was that for central water heaters for multifamily buildings, in our previous guidance, we specifically acknowledged that there isn't an Energy Star criteria for such a system. And therefore since there isn't a criteria, there isn't a certified system that can be used. So we asked that you wait until that was established. But really, as you know, given the intense focus on multifamily projects for states, many of you that are preparing to launch your programs, that provision was not viable in our view. So we have changed that so that we will consider non-Energy Star certified central water heater or central water heater systems, to be more specific, on a case-by-case basis that you propose. And we will have an efficient review and approval process in place to do that. Then we have some maybe 4 or 5 items. There are minor items that we are really we are not really adding anything new per se, but we wanted to just be more explicit about some of these requirements to avoid ambiguity and confusion, and I'll go over those items. And lastly, we have mentioned this before in previous office hours with state energy offices, but to address concerns of fraud raised by DOE's Inspector General, we have strengthened the income self-attestation requirement. That again, and I will go over the details on that. in this presentation, when I talk about, by the way, her or here, I mean, there, I think you already know that, but by her or home efficiency rebates, I'm really referring to the homes or the Section 50121, and for the here or HERA, referring to the Section 50122 program. Just in terms of how I mark down the slides. Okay, next item. So really, again, in terms of the main thing that it does is in this guidance modification is aligning the text with the supplemental documents that are already out there, such as the data and tools requirements guide and the required elements of a consumer protection plan. So again, we really just reflect the changes that are already made in the data and tools requirements guide, particularly where we delete the reference to BPI 1100 for Section 50121 program, and we clarify in its place what the required elements of home assessment are, and clarifications of the limited assessment for the Section 50122 program, which again are contained in the data and tools requirements guide. We are merely aligning the language. The next item on the consumer protection plan provisions, again, we have developed, and I think many of you have seen this already. I think it's a 10-page document specifically that compiles all the required elements for the consumer protection plan that you must submit. And so given that that is supposed to really give you a more detailed explanations, there's more details in that language or in that document in the required elements of a consumer protection plan that you may not see in the main program requirements document. Just to avoid confusion that we have that we are not setting out two separate standards, we merely import the language from the required elements of a consumer protection plan. The exact wording is where the exact wording is not found in the main requirements document, we import that into the main requirements document. Some of those certainly reference the items like the use of do not pay service, what we generally expect in terms of the minimal vetting of contractors for the qualified contractor list. And there may be a couple of other items, but again, if you are good and understand that our technical resource, the required elements for consumer protection plan, that contains all that you need to know to complete a consumer protection plan. There isn't anything new outside of that in this guidance modification. The last item is in terms of aligning the text is already we have provided in our FAQ number 45 on the topic of the maximum amount of rebate that may be provided for the Section 50122 program for the heat pump dryer and kitchen appliance. And what our current guidance in FAQ 45 states is that you may provide rebates for both a kitchen appliance and a heat pump dryer as long as the total amount of those two rebates do not exceed $840. Because this guidance was given in the FAQ instead of in our main requirements document, this was the opportunity for us to update our main requirements document to reflect the FAQ 45. Next slide. Okay, then some additional clarifications that we are providing. These are really just minor tweaks, again, but just doing what we can to minimize confusion or avoid confusion, ideally. So for the Section 50122 program, we clarify that where we talk about one rebate is allowed per QEP, we really mean that for the appliance category. So those are the dryers, heat pump dryers, kitchen appliance, water heaters, and the heat pumps for heating and cooling. Because more than one rebate may be given out for the other QEPs that relate to building products, such as insulation, wiring, electrical wiring, and so forth. And that guidance is also, you can find that in our FAQ. So this is really just being consistent with the FAQ guidance that we have provided. We also clarify that duct sealing and duct insulation are eligible, which was missing in the previous guidance. We also mentioned, rather seek to clarify that for the Section 50122 program, in the previous guidance, we said that the limited assessment required a recommendation on the heat pump sizing to be given to the homeowner or the tenant. But we clarified that that provision really only applies if the assessor performing the limited assessment is qualified to give such a recommendation. So meaning if a contractor is doing the limited assessment, that provision applies. But if they're not qualified to do it, we don't expect a non-qualified person to give recommendation on heat pump sizing. And for both 50121 and 50122 programs, we clarify or just make explicit what we just presumed the whole time, which is that reasonable product returns must be allowed. Okay, that's it. Next slide. So the last item that we try to do in this guidance modification is just provide more flexibility. So again, as I mentioned before, for 50122, we have specifically in our previous guidance, we have specifically called out the fact that while we didn't have an Energy Star certificate criteria for central water heaters systems, that we ask that you wait until that criteria gets established, but we do not want that to be the cause of delay in your program enabling projects. So we will consider when you submit alternate equipment for our consideration, we will consider those non-Energy Star certified equipment. And then we will review that and give you approval based on our process. I do want to be really clear that somehow you do not take away from this exception that this is somehow providing a way out of using Energy Star certified products when that's available. Again, the baseline requirement stays the same, where you have to use Energy Star certified equipment where applicable. Okay, the next item in terms of flexibility is for the Section 50122 program, we have a table, I believe it's table 9, where we have set out the amount for each QEP. Rather, we have set out the amount of the contractor incentive for each QEP or the qualified electrification project. In the previous guidance, that was, we have sort of framed that as the baseline requirement. But in this guidance modification, we make it clear that to give you more flexibility in terms of setting the amount of incentive, contractor incentive for QEPs, we make it clear that that table, the values in that table is a recommendation and is not a requirement. Again, so you have the discretion to set the appropriate contractor incentive for each of the QEP not to exceed $500 for a dwelling unit or a home. Again, the next item, I guess, is just really not about flexibility, but just clarification. So I'll skip that. Another area where we try to provide flexibility is where the rebate is involved in financing. So as you might recall, where financing is involved, there are several consumer protection provisions that get triggered. One of them is a 7-day waiting period for the agreement to essentially cool off. So it's the 7-day period where the consumer can agree to the financing terms, but they can change their mind up to the 7 days. What we we have provided some exception to that 7-day waiting period requirement for heat pump dryers and kitchen appliances, where the stores that sell those appliances provide a return policy that's longer than 7 days. So if that's the case, the 7-day waiting period requirement is deemed to be met. But that requirement only applies to heat pump dryer and kitchen appliances on the condition that there is a store return policy that's longer than 7 days. There's another item, which is that in the case of emergency replacements for rebates that involves financing, the consumer, in the previous guidance, the consumer could waive the 7-day waiting period through a handwritten consent to waive this requirement. We make in this guidance modification, we instruct that handwritten consent is one of the options that you can get the consent, but is not the only method of getting the consumer consent for waiving the 7-day waiting period for emergency replacements. The last item is really for the market transformation plan. In the previous guidance, we have set forth several market transformation goals that states had to incorporate, but just to really encourage more discretion for the states and encourage more innovation, we have made those set of goals recommendation, not a mandatory requirement that your market transformation plan must incorporate. Next item. The last item. So this is really addressing concerns of fraud from our Office of Inspector General. The gist of it is that the Office of Inspector Generals generally throughout the federal agencies have been raising some concern that where programs use income self-attestation, they've been finding more instances of fraud or inaccurate information being submitted to get the benefits that they might otherwise not receive. So they really strongly recommended that we strengthen the self-attestation requirement. In our previous guidance, the income self-attestation requirement was that you had to verify 50% of all rebates that were given out based on the self-attested income information after the rebate had been given. So 50% of post-issuance of rebates. That was the previous requirement. Our current requirement now is that you have to verify every rebate application that comes in that uses income self-attestation before you are able to issue a rebate. The only exception is, again, for emergency replacements. And emergency replacements are generally understood as heaters and heating and cooling equipment for that season. I understand really and sympathize that you had already been expressing how burdensome the 50% post issuance verification was going to be. And Again, I sympathize with that, but we also have to really take into consideration and counterbalance the concerns of fraud that we are receiving from our Office of Inspector General. So this is the new requirement. Okay, I believe that's it. Is there anything else? The next slide. Yep, that's it. For any additional questions, again, I believe you all know the channel that we have provided for you to post questions and get clarifications or guidance, individualized guidance from the program. You have your project officers, please feel free to follow up with them. And of course, with your NASEO, through Maddie and Elena as well. And then, because we certainly have regular check-ins with them. Happy to take any questions at this time.
No one has dropped any questions in the chat. Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Nothing? Come on.
And that really is fine. I mean, like, I do want to just maybe overall, I mean, contextualize that this second round of guidance modification, really, we didn't view it as being sort of, there isn't anything that's really earth-shattering. There are a couple of items that are really of significance and note are the Energy Star certification exception that now we allow for multifamily situations. And of course, the official change of the income self-attestation that we've been warning you about that's coming down the pike. So other than that, there really are no major changes that are in this guidance document or in this guidance modification rather. So if you don't have any questions, I'm certainly not going to be offended, but rather understand that this is fairly routine.
There's one, Edward. Someone has a question, but she said it's difficult to type.
I have a question. I was going to say I can't get on the chat right now because I'm in a vehicle. But I had a question regarding the equipment when you were talking about where there's not an Energy Star and it's on a case-by-case approval basis. So can you walk me through what that approval process looks like in terms of we have a home, they're approved, they've had the assessment done, they've identified the piece of equipment. You're saying that we need to get DOE's approval? Would this be from our project officer? Or is there a different approval process?
So this exception that we're talking about, again, is in the context of large multifamily buildings. Because currently you have a requirement to use Energy Star certified product if you find that there isn't one available. In this particular case, where we made the exception is for the central water heaters for large multifamily buildings. When you're getting rebate requests to use non-Energy Star equipment, you should let us know. You have to let us know because currently without our approval, that equipment is not in compliance. And in terms of the process, obviously we know that the speed is important. So we are currently working, or rather finalizing a process to make that fairly streamlined and easy to do. We certainly is not going to expect that you wait weeks for a decision like that. But when you have, because that's a significant investment, large centralized water heater systems for large multifamily buildings, there's a lot of money at stake. We do need to know about it to be sure.
All right, one more question then. So we go through the process, the equipment's approved. Is that a blanket approval moving forward, or if we get to another
for that system, for that system
okay,
that you have submitted to us for approval?
Okay,
it's an equipment approval. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, I think she got her. I think that was Julie, and I think she got her question answered. Yes.
How'd you know it was me, Karen?
Oh, your voice is recognizable. It's a good thing.
Sorry.
All right. So I think of course, we're going to move on. Christina Donnelly has a cumbersome to type question, so she just wants to ask it. Go.
Yeah, thanks. So on a previous slide, it had said that the changes to the instructions were made to reflect the explanatory text in the required elements of a consumer protection plan. Yeah. And, it references the do not pay requirement. And in the required elements of the consumer protection plan, the do not pay isn't listed as a requirement. It's just in the sample response. And so my question is, are there sample responses? Are there sample responses that we're required to implement even if they're not reflected in the guidance? And I realize the do not pay is now reflected in the guidance, but I wouldn't have known that that was a requirement if I was just reading it in the sample responses. So are there other sample responses that we're required to implement or obligated to implement?
Well, let me just go to the premise though. The do not pay is in the required elements of a consumer protection plan. It's in the footnotes as an example.
Well, it's it's in the footnotes of the program guidance now, but at least when I do a search, it only shows up in the sample responses.
Really, I believe, well, because maybe there might have been an editing mistake. The do not pay should also be in the required elements of a consumer protection plan in the footnotes. But let me just double check that. I'm pretty sure that is in there, because the only exercise that we were trying to do there is mirror the language. So generally, Christina, I mean, just the idea is that there should be consistency with some of these technical resource documents. Their language should really reflect and match the main requirements document. So that's generally the expectation that we have of it. If you see something in our sample response that you take a look at it and you're like, there's just no way that there's any of this language in any of the main requirements document, you can take that as our recommendation. It's sort of our recommended best practice, but it itself is not a requirement.
Okay, yeah, I just don't see it as a requirement in that sample response. It just says checking against checking against databases such as the do not pay. Anyway, okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, unless there's an editing blip, because I remember writing that in for the required elements of a consumer protection plan. That should be in there, but yeah, I'll double check, and maybe there was an editing whoopsie that we have to go back and fix for that document as well. So, but again,
yes.
the important principle is really what controls it is the main requirements document, and when you see something in our supplemental documents and things like templates, sample responses, that you try to find where that language comes from in our main requirements, and you just really on a sane mind just cannot find that, then you may just treat that as our recommended practice, but not itself a requirement.
Okay. Thank you, Edward. In case you guys didn't know, I offered to be MC of the question period. Next question is about modeling software, which, and the next question too are, neither of them are about kind of the scope of this particular webinar. I will say on modeling software for multifamily buildings, Adam Morse dropped into the chat. We are just today publishing guidance about modeling for multifamily, today or tomorrow. Can't remember if it's coming out or today or tomorrow. So for that question, just stay tuned in your inbox for our normal SCEP office updates, and you will see our help there. For questions about general questions about data and tools, we kind of prefer that you send those questions over in your normal venues, be it either through your project officer, or if you feel free to drop us a question through our website intake process, and we will make sure, Miriam, to get those questions answered as well. But we're going to try and keep that off this meeting and keep this one specific to the program guidance. Anything else from anyone on this call that we can help you clarify these program guidance changes? Going once, going twice. Maddie, I think we're handing it back to you.
That's perfect. Thanks, Karen, for emceeing, and thanks, Edward, for presenting. Appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Like Karen said, if you guys have any follow-up questions, you can use your usual routes to connect with DOE. And of course, happy to take feedback as well, especially if you have any requests for additional content, additional topics, please let us know. Most of you, I hope, have the invitation for our monthly standing call with all of the states on rebate updates. So hopefully we will see you there. Otherwise, as always, please reach out if anything comes up. Thank you again to our SCEP friends for being there, and we'll close it out pretty early. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.